thank you. Welcome to everybody. So my special thanks, of course, is for Mr. Kwame, that is here with us in this very special moment for us, for il bosco delle querce di Seveso e Meda, that is the place in which we are now. We are very, very happy. And I'm Beatrice Oleari, and I'm in charge of a special project here inside the wood, the bosco. It's called Together for the Wood. It's a project, the main purpose of this project is to, is a sort of reactivation of the Bosco delle Querce di Seveso e Meda in terms of a common good, no? So a place in which the community can feel really at home. And of course, the wood is not a symbol, a simply urban park, but is a symbol, is the result of an environmental disaster that occurred in this land in 1976, and because of an incident inside a chemical manufacturing plant. And so the wood is the results of this disaster also in terms that was strongly demanded from the local community instead of an incinerator. So instead of the incinerator, now we have the wood, and I think that is not so bad. And so today we want to talk about some issues that means a lot for us and also for the story of this place. And so I introduce you the person that will help to animate this conversation. First of all, here with me from the wood, Emanuela Macelloni, that is a sociologist that is running also a sociological investigation with the local stakeholders, and Laura Centemeri. Laura is a researcher in environmental sociology at the French CNRS, but is also a very important person for Seveso because still, 2002, when she started a post-disaster research, she started to study the disaster of Seveso and the community and so on, and everything go inside the publication, important for this place, that is Back to Seveso. And so we are very happy that Laura is here with us today. Then we have from Villa d'O, Gemma Beretta, Laura Balestrini, Maurizio Zilio, all members, historical members of the Legambiente circles in Seveso. Circles that is dedicated to Laura Conti, another Laura, very important for Seveso, and then we can speak later. And then we have one now, but probably two after, two young brains. One is Elena Corsi Buttini, that is the author of Silence, that is the first podcast about the disaster. And probably later we can have also Andrea Pagani, that probably you know. Andrea Pagani is the MD and infectious diseases specialist, and probably you also reach Andrea during your research for your last book. Andrea? Okay. No. Sorry. Finally, of course, we have Mr. Kwame, that already know, like science popularizer, writer, and author of the bestseller Spillover, and also the recent Breathless that was published by Adelphi. And connected with us from Montana, there is also Elvira Roncalli, that is a professor of philosophy at Carroll College in Helena, Montana, that will help us with the translation from English. So I think that we can start a conversation with Laura that can introduce us today.
Okay. Hi, and thank you, Mr. Kwame, for your presence here today. So we have decided to define topics. Each of us has a topic to address. And in my case, it is to explain to you the role of Laura Conti in Seveso, and to situate Laura Conti in the context of the problem of uncertainty that the community of Seveso was confronted with when the accident happened, because the accident caused a massive dioxin contamination of the land at a time in which nobody really knew about the consequences of dioxin, because the accident in Seveso was the first time in which dioxin contaminated a population. Studied had been done on workers, for example, contaminated by dioxin, but Seveso was the first time in which an entire population was affected by dioxin. The other population was the Vietnam population at that time, because the Agent Orange that was used during the war had the same herbicide that was at the origin of the accident here. So the accident happened in 1976. So, and it was in the Italian history. The 70s have been very important time for the development of social movement concerned with knowledge, concerned with the relationship between science and society. And the Seveso disaster has been really a situation in which it was clear that in our time, citizenship and democracy need a science knowledge in order to really be active as a citizenship in our time. Knowledge of science is important because a lot of public problems are related to scientific issues, to technical and scientific issues. And at that time, in the worker movements, there was an effort to build new protocols of knowledge production on health workers' issues, involving workers into collaboration with scientists to produce evidence on health-related issues. And when the disaster happened in 76, the idea has been to involve the local population in checking the consequences of the dioxin, in creating a popular movement, let's say, engaged into addressing the medical and technical issues caused by the disaster. And Laura Conti, let's say, for you maybe is easier to present her, and somehow similar to Rachel Carson as a kind of public figure. She has been really the most important figure in the ecological in the political ecology movement that was at the beginning at the time in Italy. And Laura Conti was a politician, but she was also a scientist. She was a doctor. She studied medicine, and she at the same time held public responsibilities. She was elected at the regional government. And when the disaster happened, Laura Conti decided to invest her time and energy in Seveso to create the condition for a public participation in addressing the consequences of the disaster. And the main obstacle to this, one of the obstacles to this project was the high uncertainty related to the consequences of the contamination, because dioxin was not known. There was no way to really define the extent of the contamination. So you have to imagine that a part of the population was evacuated from the city because, the risks were supposedly very high, but at the same time, all these measures has been taken with no involvement of local population and also of local institutions. So the mayors were not involved into taking this kind of decision. So the idea was a state of emergency in which only specialists were considered as, having the capacities to deal with this uncertainty. And Laura Conti was against this way of dealing with uncertainty and with uncertain situation, because she thought that people were not necessarily not able to understand the difficulty of making decision in conditions of uncertainty. And she strongly supported the idea that people should get involved with the difficulty of the decision-making process. And of course, this necessitated a strong investment in creating the condition of participation. Laura Conti was very close with Barry Commoner, so someone that maybe you also know. And Barry Commoner went to Seveso, also was involved in this movement. And this movement was somehow similar to the Science for the People movement that Barry Commoner has started in the United States, with this idea that democracy in our time needed citizens with capacities to engage with complex issues. And so of course, investing in creating the capacities to deal with this kind of situations. So you maybe can see the similarities somehow with the situation of the COVID crisis. I mean, when the COVID crisis started, I think that a lot of people in Seveso went back with their mind to this situation in which special powers are needed, lines are drawn to, and protocols are decided in order to change the behavior of people, to protect their health, but at the same time with no consideration or no sufficiently involvement in understanding also the social consequences of this decision, and if other ways to manage this complicated, uncertain, and risky situation could be defined. The engagement of Laura Conti in Seveso has been very inspiring for many people. At the same time, was not completely successful because anyway, also people in Seveso were under the shock of the disaster, and it was not so easy to involve them. At the same time, let's say that my first element for this discussion is let's say is to to ask you how you see this let's say this shift from a vision of science for the people in terms of not simply having people participate in scientific problems, but really taking seriously people and their experience as the basis for deciding what kind of science do. And I mean, not just involving people when problems are already set, but having them involved in the problem setting and also in the problem-solving strategies. So how have we moved from this ambition of having a science for the people to what is called science populism, which is this sort of lack of trust in science, and this, this idea of being able alone to find scientific answers in the face of unsatisfactory scientific answers that are offered as the general interpretation. I know that you have I know that you are interested also in why and how maybe we can counteract this kind of misunderstanding in what does it mean that science is social and that people has the right to engage with science. So I don't know if it is clear, my question, but the first point to discuss was about this shift from science from the people to populism in science.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Laura. Can everybody hear me? All right.
Yeah, okay. I don't know if Elvira, I don't know if you can translate maybe some main issues in Italian, maybe for the Italian public, or I don't know. What do you think? But just.
Yes, Beatrice, I am open to do that. It seems that a lot of you do understand.
No, okay.
I'll do as much as necessary.
Ok.
So,
no, diciamo che Laura ha posto a Mr. Kwame.
I can translate. Oh, I think you. Sorry, I misunderstood you.
No, okay. You can do that. Okay, thank you so much.
Yes, Mr. Kwame, do you need some additional translation from what Elena?
No. Thank you for all of this has been in English, or virtually all of it so far, and I thank you very much for indulging me and being so considerate to me. I wish I could do this in Italian, and I mean to learn Italian, but I do not possess any Italian to speak of yet. But let me say a few words, at least, about what Laura. It's also Laura, right?
Yes, correct.
Yes.
I was mistaken. Laura Centemeri
has said, and then we can proceed with the conversations. But first of all, I'm just very, very glad for this invitation. I very much appreciate your welcoming me, at least virtually, to Seveso. And I'm sorry it wasn't possible for me to get there while I was in Italy last month. I also want to welcome my friend Gabriella Pagani, who is with us now, who has been very helpful to me when I was researching this book. He's a character in the book, and he certainly knows about the uncertainties of science and the difficulties of communicating science to the general public. Let me say just a few things in response to your very substantive and complicated presentation and question, Laura. First of all, I think that this question of uncertainty that's difficult for the general public, this aspect of uncertainty in scientific questions and even in scientific answers, it is difficult. It's one of the things that we journalists, we authors, we educators have to work on very strenuously in talking about and writing about science to the general public, and in particular to young people, to children, to students as young as 11, 12, 13 years old. I think that the beginning point is that we need to be helping people understand not just what science says, but what science is and how science works. And part of the confusion among the general public when there's a matter of uncertainty, science says this in February of 2020, but then in April of 2020, science is saying something else. Science suddenly is saying that this coronavirus can be transmitted from people who show no symptoms, and it's not possible to trace all the contacts. And it is important for everyone, not just healthcare workers, to be wearing masks. That's different in April of 2020 from what people, even people as sensible as Dr. Tony Fauci, were saying in February of 2020. So the general public says, well, science says this one month, says that another month. Science is confused, science is inconsistent. We don't trust science. We're going to go to the internet. We're going to go to Google, and we're going to do our own research. We're going to do amateur virology. We're going to do amateur epidemiology because we have lost faith in these experts and we don't know who to turn to So we'll turn to all of the voices on the internet, many of which are saying crazy, false things, but because it's on the internet, because it's on a web page, because it looks like it's coming from someone who knows what he or she is talking about simply because they're confident, we're going to trust this. So we've had this crisis of misinformation and false confidence and confusion. And maybe, Laura, that's what you're referring to when you talk about science populism. It's really pseudoscience populism. It's really people, and for us in English, it's people say, well, I'm doing my research. They don't say I'm doing science, but they say I'm doing my research, meaning I'm spending hours on the internet and I'm finding things that agree with my biases and my political views, and then I'm embracing them as though they're true. So that's what we're talking about partly, right? And it has become a crisis. And I'm sure that for the people of Seveso to go through COVID-19 while they have still vivid in their memories the crisis of 1976, the dioxin crisis, would seem like deja vu, would seem like, oh, here we go again. Science is talking at us, quack, 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 and they're telling us, because of this scientific fact, you have to do this. You have to wear masks, you have to close the schools, you have to evacuate your town, you have to do whatever was done during the 76 crisis, all of those things. And it makes people feel suspicious and powerless and cynical about science. And suddenly they don't believe what Tony Fauci says anymore. They don't believe what epidemiologists in Italy say anymore. They don't believe what public health officials say because they're doing their own research on the internet. How do we get past that? As I said, part of it is that journalists, authors, teachers have to concentrate on helping people understand not just what science says this one month, science says that the next month, but what science is. The fact that science is a very human process that uses empirical evidence, observation, hypothesis testing to move incrementally closer to an accurate understanding of physical reality, of the physical world. That's what science does. And it's not a perfect system for acquiring a better, clearer, more accurate understanding of the physical world, but it's the best one that we have. And science makes mistakes, but part of the organization of science is that science corrects its own mistakes. Scientists correct one another. And so it's this incremental process of moving toward a clearer understanding, sometimes with steps backwards, sometimes with corrections, sometimes a theory that has been highly supported with evidence for years, for decades, even for centuries, has to be surrendered, has to be given up when new evidence derived from new tools. The microscope was a new tool. The telescope was a new tool. And when those tools became useful to scientists, understanding of things changed because there were new data, there was new empirical evidence. So the heliocentric universe of Ptolemy was rejected, tossed away, because we had work from Galileo and Kepler and Copernicus based on observations with telescopes saying the universe doesn't revolve around the Earth. This solar system revolves around the sun, and who knows what's going on beyond that. New evidence, new theories, new certainty, but the certainty is always provisional. So it's not really certainty. Certainty is uncertainty makes people suspicious of science because they don't understand that certainty itself is a complicated element in science. Certainty is always provisional, and we probably shouldn't even use the word certainty. We should use the word confidence. We should say a theory or a hypothesis is highly, highly, highly supported with the evidence that we have. And if we get new evidence that challenges that understanding, then we revise that theory. Now, what about children? What about students, 10, 11, 12, 13 years old? I think we need to teach them, help them learn more science, more biology, also more history, because science is a historical process. It's grounded, it's embedded in history. And I've said this before, but I'll say it again, and critical thinking. Because when those people as adults go to the internet and say, I'm going to do my own research, oh, I see, someone is telling me that this virus was engineered by evil scientists in China or at the CIA and released intentionally on the world. They find somebody saying that, and they are not capable of applying critical thinking to that. Is this reliable? Is this supported with evidence? Or is this just some sort of a crazy claim? So children, how do we help them toward critical thinking? We help them to understand that when they read something that makes a claim, the virus was engineered intentionally, the moon is made of green cheese, Saudi Arabia won the World Cup in 2022, the children can say, well, what's your evidence? How do you know? How do you know the moon is made of green cheese? And just with that simple tool, reminding children that when an adult says something to them, this is a fact, it doesn't make sense to you, it's counterintuitive, but this is a fact. This virus was engineered intentionally to harm humans. Even a 12-year-old boy or girl can ask, how do you know? How do you know? What's the evidence? So I don't have the solution for how to solve the disinformation storm that's going on now. I wish I did. We all need to think about that. But part of it, I know, is a responsibility, not just on scientists, but on those of us journalists, authors, and teachers who stand in between scientists and the general public, including the general public of children. We have to do better at helping people understand what science is and how it works, and apply critical thinking to those claims that are made without the support of the real scientific process. Does that make sense?
We think so.
Io gentilmente, Elvira, in modo sintetico per il nostro pubblico non così inglese oriented.
Esatto. Microfono, Elvira.
Grazie. Many thanks for your response, very accurate, detailed, and specific response to Laura Centemeri. Gemma just asked me to, mi discuso. Just asked me to translate in English, so in Italian, sorry. I'm going to transition to Italian for a little bit.
And I can give shorter answers and allow you time to translate after each one. We'll do that from now on, but go ahead.
So, brevemente, credo che abbiate seguito il filo del discorso di David Quammen sulla incertezza della scienza e del fatto che, come Laura Centemeri ha parlato del science populism fenomeno, che è diffuso un po' dappertutto, non solo in Italia o negli Stati Uniti, e come rispondere a questa crisi di conoscenza della scienza. Allora, secondo Quammen bisogna cercare di spiegare non solo cosa la scienza dice, ma cosa effettivamente la scienza fa, cioè il metodo scientifico, e far capire alla gente come funziona. Nel senso che se il pubblico in generale sente uno scienziato dire che il Covid si trasmette in un certo modo e che non c'è bisogno di mettere le mascherine, ma poi 2 mesi dopo si rettifica e si dice che c'è bisogno di mettere le mascherine, allora è chiaro che il pubblico cominci a dubitare della come dire, la conoscenza scientifica che viene espressa. Quindi si prendono in mano la situazione e vanno a cercare su internet di trovare la risposta a quello che non capiscono e arrivano a questo, quello che lui chiama pseudo science populism, e che definiscono come faccio ricerca io per conto mio. Questa è una crisi che bisogna affrontare e che sicuramente la gente di Seveso si è ritrovata a rivivere, anche se sono passati un po' di anni con il Covid, dopo essere passati per il disastro della diossina, e si sono ritrovati ad affrontare simili questioni come cosa facciamo, qual è il nostro, la nostra capacità di affrontare questa cosa invece di essere messi da parte da istituzioni e da magari anche autorità politiche. Ecco, Kwame ritorna continuamente, è ritornato più volte, sono certa che l'abbiate capito, su la responsabilità dei giornalisti, gli autori, gli scienziati che scrivono sulla scienza, che devono prendere la responsabilità di spiegare anche ai più giovani, ai bambini di 8-10 anni, come funziona il processo scientifico, che non è un processo perfetto, che procede per, come dire, per ricerca che si fonda su evidenza, questa evidenza che però non è mai assoluta, non è mai certa, che viene incrementata e quindi viene corretta man mano che l'evidenza si fa più chiara. Per cui dice, forse anche il termine certezza non è un buon certezza scientifica, non è un buon termine da utilizzare, bisognerebbe forse parlare di siamo confidenti che quello che abbiamo trovato ci permette di dire con grande confidenza che questa è la situazione. Quindi non trasmettere una certezza che non c'è, ma che è in processo di essere come dire, definita più chiaramente, e bisogna farlo con la popolazione in generale, a partire da anche i bambini più giovani gli studenti. Critical thinking è un altro componente molto importante, perché quelli che vanno a fare la ricerca su internet per conto loro e leggono tutte queste informazioni che sono in realtà non fondate, non sanno applicare e pensare in maniera critica queste informazioni che ricevono, e bisogna instillare nei bambini, nei più giovani, che non sono magari così affabili nel discorso scientifico, di chiedere, di saper chiedere come fai a sapere questo, qual è l'evidenza che ti porta a dire questo. E quindi dice non ho una soluzione perfetta, non ho una soluzione precisa per risolvere questa crisi di informazione riguardo la scientificità, come dire, la comunicazione della conoscenza scientifica, però dice che appunto sta negli educatori, negli autori, nei giornalisti la responsabilità di comunicare chiaramente e di far capire come la scienza procede e non solo cosa la scienza dice. Sommariamente spero di aver...
Grazie Elvira, sei stata molto utile, grazie. Laura, tu hai qualcosa da dire? Se no passiamo...
No, ok.
No,
No, va bene.
Di tu qualcosa e poi passiamo la parola a Villadò.
No, passiamo.
Ok, ok, adesso forse dagli amici di Villadò può partire un'altra tematica. So I will pass the ball to Lengambiente Circle, then they can also put on the table another issue for us, ok?
Lengambiente Seveso parla squisitamente italiano e dopo Cecilia che è al mio fianco o Elvira insomma ci aiuteranno. Intanto di nuovo grazie che siamo state entusiaste della lettura di Spillover prima e di Senza Respiro dopo, e Ci piace moltissimo questo raccontare la comunità scientifica, è elettrizzante, direi, molto importante. Per questo ci prendiamo un po' questa domanda, insomma, visto che è un grande narratore, David Quammen, ed è stato da poco in Italia. Vorremmo chiedere quale immagine dell'Italia oggi, dopo il Covid, si porta e ci restituisce, visto che anche nel suo libro Senza respiro parla dell'Italia in modo, diciamo, direi indulgente, nel senso che parla dell'Italia come di un paese particolarmente sfortunato durante l'epidemia del Covid. E rispetto a queste immagini che ci portiamo dentro di un'Italia che forse ha insegnato tanto al resto del mondo per il grande disastro che qui è accaduto, abbiamo le immagini ancora delle bare portate dall'esercito nella provincia di Bergamo, forse però quello che lui ha visto è anche qualcosa d'altro che è importante raccontare, cioè che forse c'è stata anche una sfortuna e c'è stato anche un anticipare i tempi dell'epidemia, insomma c'è anche dell'altro tra quello che abbiamo visto e che abbiamo sofferto, e quindi ci fa piacere fare questa domanda, quale sguardo ci restituisce, quale immagine del nostro paese ci vuole restituire.
Io. Okay. Hi, I'm Cecilia. I'm just here to help them. Sometimes I translate when you talk, when we have our microphone off. So, because most of them only talk in Italian, only understand Italian. If Elvira wants to help me with the question, because I only wrote down a little bit of part of the question, not the whole question. I'm just a student. I'm studying actually science, so that's why I'm here. So her question was, what image you have of Italy? And because in your book, you talk about Italy in a very indulgent way. You say that Italy was unlucky, but there was something else, and then I don't remember what she said.
Stata sfortunata perché è successo qualcosa che lui racconta, che c'è forse un'anticipazione di questo virus, mentre noi abbiamo visto solo immagini della difficoltà dell'Italia ad affrontare la grave emergenza sanitaria.
So we were unlucky because you say that the virus probably came here before the pandemic. That was the question, summing up the question. And we only saw what happened during the pandemic, but we didn't know that the virus was already here. Scusa, non l'ho tradotta letteralmente.
So maybe I will just add just briefly that so what the rest of the world saw looked very scary, what happened in Italy before it did occur elsewhere. But maybe while you were in Italy, you also got to see other sides of what happened during the time of the pandemic. I know you went there later, but that you got to see other sides. And the question has to do with also, besides what was very visible on TV, you know, coffins being carried, and the pain and the many deaths. Was there something else that you did find while visiting Italy, that, you know, an image or something that you would like to tell us about, being that you are such a great narrator and writer on things scientific?
Well, I did say, and I'll give a couple of sections of answer, Elvira, and then you can translate sections of it. First of all, I'll say that I did say that in answer to the question, why was Italy, especially northern Italy, hit so badly in the first wave? the wave of March that began in March of 2020, when the hospitals were full in Bergamo and there had been an outbreak in Castiglione d'Adda that Gabriella was involved with studying. And cases were being taken to the hospitals in Milan, such as Sacco, because the hospitals in Bergamo were already full. What was going on? Why was it such a terrible wave? Was it because politicians had made mistakes about closing down certain areas, lockdowns in certain areas too soon or too late? And my point has been, I think that does not explain it. I think that it seems probable that Italy was very unlucky in that a large number of cases had been brought in, probably through Malpensa Airport, but I don't have evidence for that. And that Northern Italy, Lombardy, etc., was heavily seeded with the virus early on in the pandemic, late January, February, heavily seeded with cases that were asymptomatic, most of them, but were transmitting the virus to a lot of people. So the virus got in, I think, and was passed around invisibly before many people got sick. And then in March, Italy caught fire because eventually those cases, those asymptomatic cases, infected people who suffered severe cases, needed hospitalization, and that all occurred at once, and suddenly there wasn't capacity for hospitalization, for intensive care, for treatment. Unlucky in that sense. Elvira, do you want to translate that much?
Certo. Cecilia, vuoi dire qualcosa? Altro? Ok. Semplicemente che sì, è vero, l'Italia del Nord in particolare è stata molto gravemente colpita dal Covid, molto presto naturalmente. Perché? Perché in particolare, qual è la domanda? Perché la Lombardia ha menzionato alcuni paesi, Castiglioni d'Adda e provincia di Bergamo, perché i politici hanno fatto degli errori troppo presto, troppo tardi, hanno preso decisioni troppo presto. Questo di per sé, dice Kwame, non spiega completamente la gravità della situazione in Italia, specialmente in Nord Italia e in Lombardia. Che l'Italia, in particolare il Nord Italia, sia stato particolarmente sfortunato, sì. Lui pensa che molti casi, un grande, vabbè, non ha le prove, ha detto, non ha le prove quindi, però pensa che un gran numero di casi di Covid siano passati dall'aeroporto della Malpensa e che non abbiano, che non avessero dei sintomi. Che però ha dato modo che questi casi si distribuissero, fossero passati e a un certo punto hanno preso fuoco, sono diventati visibili e quando ha preso fuoco così tanti casi improvvisamente, è successo molto velocemente, l'Italia si è trovata impreparata, non ha avuto, come dire, le risorse o comunque gli strumenti per affrontare una contagione così rapida e così grande. Quindi la sfortuna sicuramente ha avuto la sua parte.
Thank you, Elvira. In terms of the second part of your question, Gemma, about what I saw when I came back to Italy, one of the things that struck me most was that the Italian people that I met, and admittedly I was traveling not to do research, but to talk about my book and to meet with people and talk about the experience. I wasn't going to hospitals. I wasn't going to scientific laboratories. I did get to see Gabriella. He was virtually the only one of my scientific sources that I got to meet while I was in Italy. I was traveling as part of in the media world, not in the scientific world, but not just in the media world, in the world of real people, of the public, people who came out when I gave lectures or when I was interviewed, came out to be in the audience and to ask questions, to listen to me, but to ask questions and make their own statements. And what I was struck by was how many people were so interested in trying to understand what happened with COVID and what to some extent is still happening and what will happen. In the US, people are tired of COVID. People are tired of COVID everywhere. I realize that. COVID fatigue is the term we use in English, COVID fatigue. But in Italy, people have shown less fatigue, less desire to hide from this horrible experience and forget about it and get on with their lives and not talk about it and not hear about it. Less of that in Italy than I've seen in the US or than I've seen elsewhere. And I think that that's really important. That's good. I'm glad to see that people want to understand what happened and how and why and how can we defend against it next time? How can we be better prepared? How can we place our sorrows in a rational context of science and history? I was very impressed by the zeal of Italian people that I met while I was there to do that, to understand, and not to run away from this bad experience. And there's joy as well as sorrow in that. I encountered a lot of joy and a lot of gratitude. People saying, thank you for staying interested in Italy, even when you were stuck over in Montana, sitting in a little room with a computer, doing your research for this book. Thank you for that. Thank you for coming back. I experienced the wonderful Italian joy at being with other people, eating good food, seeing beautiful landscape, being in beautiful cities, carrying on with their lives, even with the burden of the losses and the sorrow.
Thank you. I am ready to go, but Cecilia, do you want to start?
Uguale.
Va bene, grazie.
Lui dice che non era in Italia per fare ricerca, ma era in Italia per parlare del suo libro. Ed è qui che incontra, cioè per questo ha soltanto rapporti principalmente con la stampa, ed è qui che incontra il nostro ricercatore Gabriele, che è uno dei primi fonti per scrivere poi il suo prossimo libro. E in Italia è impressionato da quante persone fossero interessate a capire cosa stesse succedendo in quel momento, mentre invece lui lo paragona agli Stati Uniti. Le persone, dice, sono stanche di sentire parlare del Covid, la parla di COVID fatigue. In Italia invece lo sono meno, viene impressionato dallo zelo delle persone in Italia, italiane, a capire ciò, appunto, cosa stesse succedendo, e parla tantissimo della gioia anche insieme in questa situazione molto difficile, questo appunto riassumendo il suo intervento. If I may, I do also have a question about this. I'm sorry. So you said you were traveling through Italy to talk about your book. So you mainly met people who are interested in science. You didn't meet people who don't know anything about science, who didn't read your book. So maybe this could be your bias.
See,
the difference between Italy
yes.
and the US.
That's absolutely true, I'm sure. And I appreciate that it looks different if you're an Italian citizen and you're functioning every day going to work, going to university, going wherever, and you're amid people who are not interested in science, and perhaps do have more COVID fatigue than they have curiosity. I appreciate that my sampling of people in Italy during this trip or during any trip is very biased. It's very select. It's very particular. It's just the best that I can do, unless I'm living in Italy and involved with everyone day to day in a more routine way than in a visit such as I just made. But I'd like to believe that Italy is smarter than the United States.
I'd like that too, but I feel bad here.
The reality is always a little bit more mixed. Bisogno di traduzione o siamo...
Magari un...
brevemente?
Sì, brevemente, grazie. Elvira.
Semplicemente la domanda di Cecilia, che probabilmente lui ha avuto modo di incontrare soprattutto un pubblico che è molto interessato nel discorso scientifico, nella scienza, è curioso riguardo queste domande, quindi magari non riflette la realtà del pubblico in generale italiano, però lui ammette che probabilmente questo è vero. Non ha il modo di passare un lungo periodo in Italia, vivere in Italia. Lui ha visitato l'Italia proprio per presentare questo libro, e questo è il pubblico che lui ha incontrato, un pubblico molto curioso, molto interessato a capire perché il Covid, come si è presentato in Italia, come ha fatto tanti morti, che c'è un desiderio di capire, di comprensione che lui non vede, non trova per esempio negli Stati Uniti e negli altri posti. Tutto lì.
Grazie Elvira. Elena, Gabriele, avete qualche domanda per Mr. Komen? Se no poi ne posso fare una anch'io.
Ma io mi inserirei... Mi sentite tutti intanto bene, perché non sono mai sicuro?
Sì, ti sentiamo
okay.
bene.
No, se per voi va bene, io volevo un attimo inserirmi sul discorso brevemente, poi magari inserisco anch'io un tema. Parlo in italiano, sì.
Come preferisci? Sì. Se vuoi relazionarti in inglese a lui, poi noi traduciamo sia una che l'altra cosa, brevemente.
Mi sembra forse più semplice se parlo direttamente in italiano, eventualmente poi magari aggiungo qualcosa in inglese verso di lui. No, volevo riagganciarmi a quel discorso della... popolarizzazione, della democratizzazione della scienza, perché secondo me è un tema molto importante, e volevo magari dare una prospettiva un po' più dall'interno, ecco. Non che mi definisca uno scienziato io, però nel senso un filino più all'interno, ecco. E secondo me ci sono alcune cose che volevo riprendere, che ha detto Komen, che sono molto interessanti. La prima è quella dell'educazione alla scienza, cioè che il primo passo per davvero poter parlare di scienza e poter avere una scienza democratica e non populista, quindi una scienza che venga veramente compresa e di cui il popolo, per usare un termine brutto, faccia parte, è capire come funziona la scienza. Cioè la scienza è un metodo che può essere insegnato, come può essere la grammatica, come può essere la musica, e trovo che sempre nell'educazione italiana, che pure è un'ottima educazione, l'educazione pubblica italiana è sicuramente un'educazione superiore a tanti altri paesi, probabilmente anche agli Stati Uniti, però ci sia sempre questa tendenza a raccontare anche la scienza in modo molto storico, in modo molto nozionistico, mentre secondo me appunto sarebbe molto importante educare anche al linguaggio della scienza, al metodo della scienza, proprio perché senza quel linguaggio e senza quel metodo la scienza per la persona che è al di fuori del circolo degli scienziati, diciamo, si riduce a cercare informazioni un po' random su internet, che poi però appunto, come diceva giustamente David, non è in grado di verificare, o quantomeno di mettere in dubbio, perché appunto il punto della scienza è che tutto deve essere sempre messo in dubbio, che è il motivo per cui appunto poi parlare di certezza in scienza è una cosa intrinsecamente sbagliata, perché la certezza di fatto in scienza non esiste. Qualunque cosa scientifica deve poter essere messa in dubbio. E questa è una prima cosa. E l'altra cosa è, secondo me, c'è una brutta tendenza da parte dei media a rappresentare sempre la scienza come l'opinione di un singolo e soprattutto l'opinione di un singolo contro l'altra opinione di un singolo. L'abbiamo visto durante il Covid, ma lo vediamo sempre, lo possiamo vedere anche in altri temi importanti come può essere il cambiamento climatico, che è tanto affrontato ultimamente, che si tende sempre a contrapporre l'opinione di uno contro l'opinione di un altro, come se queste due opinioni fossero in qualche modo le opinioni personali dell'una e dell'altra persona e valessero uguale, quando magari c'è una persona che sta esponendo la visione di tutta la comunità scientifica e quell'altra persona che gli sta rispondendo appunto le sue opinioni o le sue idee o più o meno fondate. Però secondo me bisognerebbe trovare un modo nei media di raccontare la scienza che superi questo individualismo, questo far sembrare sempre appunto che sia l'opinione di quello lì, l'opinione dello scienziato, del virologo, del professore di turno, quando appunto quello che stanno raccontando è il frutto di mesi di lavoro di decine, se non centinaia di persone, e questa cosa viene sempre un po' a mancare, secondo me, nella narrazione della scienza fatta dai media. E per ultimo volevo appunto riagganciarmi David ha affrontato questo tema molto nel suo libro e lo ha anche accennato adesso, appunto, di questa teoria del complotto che in Italia è un po' passata in sordina forse, però in America ha avuto un'incredibile risonanza appunto questa origine artificiale del virus, no? Il virus scappato dal laboratorio dei cinesi cattivi o della CIA cattiva o del cattivo di turno, insomma. E volevo chiedergli, secondo lui, perché ci venga sempre più facile al pubblico tentare di trovare un capro espiatorio, una persona a cui dare la colpa, un cattivo di turno, quando invece forse potrebbe essere un po' più utile, un po' più e anche appunto bello da un punto di vista democratico, proprio democratico e scientifico, cioè andare a ricercare quelle cause che magari possono sembrare meno probabili, perché appunto è sempre più facile pensare che ci sia un cattivo che ha liberato un virus piuttosto che un'incredibile serie di coincidenze che sono arrivate a far sì che un virus è passato da un pangolino all'uomo nel mercato cinese. Però questa incredibile serie di coincidenze andrebbe affrontata e analizzata, perché appunto farà capire poi effettivamente davvero come potremo evitare queste ulteriori situazioni nel futuro. Invece appunto il pubblico generale vuole sempre un po' il capro espiatorio, la persona da additare, la spiegazione semplice. Volevo appunto chiedere a David perché non riusciamo anche noi scienziati, nel senso noi nostra colpa, a far capire che la complessità di a far capire l'effettiva complessità di questi fenomeni e la miriade di spiegazioni e non la singola spiegazione, la singola colpa che ci stanno dietro.
Evi, prima che tu traduca, posso, sulla scia di quello che diceva il professor Pagani, il dottor Pagani.
No, professore no, per carità.
Dottor Pagani, la domanda che voglio fare è questa e si aggancia. Il virus, l'ho imparato studiando Quamen, io non mi occupo di virus, ho capito essere un elemento vitale fortemente logico, il cui comportamento, la cui evoluzione si deve studiare per ogni virus, ma certamente è un elemento vitale programmato per il successo della sua non estinzione. Quindi con alta probabilità alla manifestazione di qualsiasi virus, non ogni spillover fa una pandemia, ma alla manifestazione di qualsiasi virus, ciò che accadrà in qualche modo è già saputo, in qualche modo, non nei termini di come si manifesterà il virus, ma come si svilupperà, come riuscirà a infettare, o comunque che riuscirà a infettare tante persone, è un dato di realtà. Questo elemento è un elemento di conoscenza fortissimo negli scienziati. In Senza Respiro, Quammen racconta molto bene come si è mossa la comunità scientifica attraverso quali fortissime relazioni di ricerca, ma anche amicali. Okay. Quello che mi domando è, poiché è così, accade sempre così, come mai uso la parola i politici, insomma, chi governa non riesce mai ad affrontare con un piano immediato, con un piano già pensato, l'evolversi della diffusione del virus per un contenimento della pandemia? Questa è una cosa, non so come dire, a fronte della logica del virus, a fronte del comportamento della scienza, c'è proprio un gap di responsabilità civile e politica, tale per cui lo si lascia accadere, sperando che non si, non lo so, sperando che non infetterà molte persone, che non evolverà, ma invece sappiamo che è così. Non tutti i virus hanno successo, ma tutti i virus sono programmati per avere questo successo. Veramente mi colpisce. In Regione Lombardia, io dirigo un ospedale lombardo, era stato fatto un piano per affrontare la pandemia all'epoca della SARS. Non è stato assolutamente preso in considerazione, eppure quel piano conteneva degli elementi che potevano essere utili al contenimento della sfortuna della Lombardia nel momento di diffusione del Covid. In qualche modo si è voluto ricominciare da capo e quindi poi abbiamo visto come la sfortuna è diventata una catastrofe, insomma è diventato un gravissimo problema di salute e sociale, insomma, quindi ecco, questo io non riesco a capirlo. Chiudo dicendovi, in questi giorni in Inghilterra c'è uno sciopero, dopo 100 anni credo, serrato degli infermieri e dei medici. L'Inghilterra ha un piano da sempre, per esempio, mai utilizzato perché dopo 100 anni che avviene uno sciopero, ma ha un piano ancora che risale credo a Churchill, ha un piano tale per cui nei casi di sciopero massivo interviene l'esercito nelle strutture di emergenza, a partire dalle ambulanze e non solo. Ecco, è prevedibile lo sciopero? Sì, c'è una soluzione, sì, studiata 100 anni fa, va bene oggi? Non lo so. Come si comporta il virus? Già lo sappiamo, sì. E perché dobbiamo tutte le volte... Come si comporta qualsiasi virus, poi come si sviluppa è tipico del virus, ma perché ci deve essere l'incredulità di fronte al manifestarsi di un virus che infetta per il suo successo e per la sua sopravvivenza? Io questo non lo capisco, cioè faccio fatica a capirlo.
Ok, Elvira, good job.
Yes. Yes, both Gabriele Pagani and Laura they have presented really very good questions for you, and I hope I'll do justice to what they have been interested in hearing about from you. First, Gabriele Pagani would like to go back to the question of the popularization versus democratization of science. And some of the things that you said in answering the question posed by Laura Centemeri. First, that it has to be done through proper education. That the education, scientific education, is done properly and in a democratic way, not in a popularized, derogative way in that sense. People need to understand how the scientific method works. And as far as the Italian educational system goes, for instance, there is much emphasis on the historical side of the science, maybe not so much on the language and on the specific, method of scientific method. By the way, the Italian scientific education system is fairly good, but still it could be better, right? And so just like for the grammar, the music, you need to understand the method. It is no different for the scientific method. So one of the key things about science is that science poses questions. It brings doubts. There is no certainty, as you pointed out, and that needs to be made more clear. There is no certainty, as you pointed out. So that is one thing that we need to do better. And so this is maybe asking you to reflect a bit more on that. The other point is about the media, how they talk about science. And this is another side that needs our attention. There is this tendency, and I don't think it's just Italian or United States, it's pretty much widespread, that the opinion of a scientist is pitted against the opinion of another scientist. So the emphasis is done or given to whatever the scientist before the media, before the public is, presented as if it is his own personal opinion. There is an emphasis on individualism versus showing how whatever that particular scientist says has been the result and the fruit of a team of scientists that have put time and effort in coming to whatever it is that the scientist is conveying through the media. So it is necessary, says Gabriele, to find a way to narrate and present the work of scientists in a much more democratic way that overcomes the individualistic approach and, the opinion of the individual. So that is what is missing. Also, going back to the theory of the complot, the theory that the virus was produced in a lab, whether in China or by the CIA, whatever, this kind of misinformed information, a piece of news that has traveled the world. Why, asked Gabriele, why is it that the general public tends to prefer an scapegoat type of answer, a very simplistic type of answer such as this, rather than taking into consideration and looking closely and very hard into the perhaps lucky coincidences that have occurred across the development of that particular viral evolution, and really show what has happened, rather than in fact the general public prefers seemingly to hold on to this very simplistic view. They don't seem to be able to grasp or be able to go beyond, that very superficial idea. Yeah. I don't know if you want to take this, and then
let me take Gabriela's two-part question first. While that's fresh in my mind. First of all, yes, I agree with Gabriela that there is a tendency in media, in in television news, in newspaper reporting, in internet reporting, there is a tendency to present what science says as this scientist's opinion versus this scientist's opinion. And I think there are a couple of reasons for that. One is that news media are always under pressure, in some cases governmental pressure, to be fair. To be fair. And they think that being fair means you always take any scientific question and you present two voices arguing against each other, two very different sides of this issue, whatever it is, and not just with science, with politics and other things too, but particularly with science. You protect yourself against accusations of being unfair, and you protect yourself against the responsibility to weigh the claims of different scientific voices and views by simply presenting the two sides and saying, okay, this person can argue his side, and then this person can argue her side. And that gives the general public the impression that there's an equal balance between these two sides. It's just one person arguing this and one person arguing that, and they both have PhDs in science. Wow. One of them has a PhD in molecular virology, and the other one has a PhD in animal behavior. But they're both talking about this virus, and they both are scientists. And so the public is given the impression that it's undecided, it's an equal balance between these two. And that's almost always false. That's almost always wrong. And it is very wrong, for instance, with the question of the origins of this virus. Because there's an argument essentially between two sides. Between the side saying that this virus has a natural origin, spilling over from a wild animal, probably a bat, getting into humans, the way many viruses have done in the past, that is very, very, very likely the explanation, although we don't have final proof. On the other hand, people saying, no, this is an engineered virus, it was manipulated in a laboratory, and it leaked. Two positions. But on this side, there's an abundance of empirical evidence. There's a lot of empirical evidence supporting the likelihood that this is a natural origins virus. Is it decided with finality? No, because science is always provisional, and because we need more information about that. We haven't yet found the animal that it spilled from. We haven't yet found the exact virus that's a progenitor of this virus in an animal. But on the other side, you have the claims that it leaked from a laboratory because it could have, because there was a laboratory doing research on coronaviruses in Wuhan, because there have been laboratory leaks in the past, but you don't have any actual evidence. This virus existed in that laboratory in Wuhan? No. As far as we know, it did not. And certainly there is an absence of evidence that it did. If it existed there, then that means that the scientists who run that laboratory are lying. And if you say that they're lying and everything they say is a lie, then science cannot proceed, because that is not, in the scientific terminology, that's not a falsifiable hypothesis. Also, in response to Gabriella's point, yes, people do prefer exciting stories to more natural stories, more routine stories. Why is that? Well, people want drama in their lives. That's why people read murder mysteries. That's why people read romance novels. That's why people read fantasy. That's why science fiction movies are very popular. People want reality that's more dramatic, more interesting than real life. And so they have a tendency to embrace conspiracy theories and melodramatic explanations and outrageous plots, I guess, because those are more interesting. Why are people still arguing about the assassination of John Kennedy in 1963? Because it's more dramatic to think that there was a conspiracy to assassinate him than to think that it was just one stupid young man who was angry and confused and bought a cheap rifle and shot the President of the United States. That story is not big enough to satisfy people. They want a bigger, more dramatic story. And they want a bigger, more dramatic story with this virus too, I think. What can we do about that? I don't know.
Okay, would you like me to say a few things
Oh, yes,
Italian?
yeah.
I don't know if...
Yeah, go ahead.
You wanted
If you
to
wanna-
stop there, or...
Yeah, I'll stop there. If you want to translate what I just said, and then you can give me the other question.
Sure.
The other lady's question.
So, yes, David Quammen went straight... Oh, pardon, mi scuso. Cambiamo, italiano. Ha parlato della tendenza dei media a presentare il discorso scientifico attraverso due scienziati e due opinioni che vengono presentate l'una contro l'altra, e la tendenza è per cercare di apparire che sono, come dire, obiettivi, che non danno la preferenza ad uno scienziato piuttosto che l'altro. C'è questa pressure of appearing fair, of presentare le opinioni come se fossero appunto tutte uguali, che non ci sia, come dire, da parte della televisione o del giornalista la preferenza per uno scienziato piuttosto che l'altro. E anche vogliono proteggersi contro le possibili accuse di essere, come dire, non obiettive, ma di preferire l'uno piuttosto che l'altro. Tutti e due gli scienziati hanno un PhD, uno in molecular virology, l'altro in comportamento animale, hanno quindi le credenziali per presentare le loro opinioni come se fossero equivalenti, quando invece appunto non è sempre così, soprattutto quando nel caso dell'origine del virus, che è stato, come dire, creato in un laboratorio, è chiaro che questa idea, questa teoria è stata diffusa e ha ricevuto credito, ma non è tanto valida come sappiamo, non è assolutamente valida come quella che infatti si è diffuso tramite spillover, e la differenza qui è che c'è evidenza empirica, che infatti è stato diffuso tramite uno spillover piuttosto che essere stato formato, costruito in un laboratorio. Perché la gente pensa quello? Perché comunque si ipotizza che questa cosa sia possibile. Cioè ha ipoteticamente una credenza come ipotesi, anche se non ha la evidenza empirica. E quindi, siccome il pubblico in generale preferisce pensare alle cose in maniera più drammatica, ama una realtà più drammatica di quello che è, basta pensare a science fiction e conspiracy theories di tutti i tipi, si spiega anche come mai tanto pubblico preferisce pensare in quel modo piuttosto che fare attenzione all'evidenza empirica. E quindi qui di nuovo poi si ritorna sul discorso dell'educazione della scienza e far capire alla gente come la scienza, il metodo scientifico viene divulgato e come funziona. Ha fatto l'esempio di John Kennedy, per esempio, perché negli Stati Uniti a tutt'oggi tanta gente pensa che ci sia preferisce pensare che ci sia una cospirazione piuttosto che questo giovane uomo che era molto arrabbiato per le sue ragioni particolari, che ha ucciso John Kennedy. Mi fermo lì.
Posso aggiungere solo una cosa velocissimissima? No, che ci stavo pensando mentre mi rispondeva lei, che forse i media dovrebbero davvero, e non voglio fare il ruffiano, però dovrebbero imparare un po' da David Quammen come si racconta la scienza, perché secondo me la sua bravura, la bellezza dei suoi libri sta proprio in come lui riesce sia a raccontare appunto questa pluralità della scienza, queste mille facce che stanno dietro, e appunto Spillover era un esempio e Senza Respiro ne è un altro esempio, e anche come riesca a rendere avvincente la scienza, la vera scienza, cioè di come riesca a portare il dramma, come dice lui, nella scienza vera, nel metodo scientifico vero e nella sperimentazione vera.
Certo. I will only add what Gabriele just said, that he wanted simply to add that the media really need to learn from you directly. You are a masterful narrator of scientific, knowledge, and you do that very beautifully in your books, both Spillover and Breathless, and you are very successful. And in a masterful way, you really show how science works. And Gabriele says, I wish we had more media journalists who could do that the way
Grazie mille, my friend Gabriele.
Now, Laura, question, which kind of followed a little bit the same kind of question that Gabriele had. It's about the virus, about which scientists, how a virus in general works. Scientists know that the virus is a vital entity. Its evolution is to survive and to diffuse, to spread. And so this is, any virus is not in order to go extinct, but really to take over as much and diffuse as much as possible. So in a way, scientists and the scientific community know a lot about the virus, how it evolves and how it will survive, how it will infect many people. How is it then that the politicians or those who are in position of government and make decision do not seem to ever be able to face with a plan that might have already been thought out in the past in a more effective manner, and so control the evolution of the virus in a more timely manner. Laura believes that there seems to be a gap between what the scientists know and the responsibility, both civil and civilian and political responsibility, that to some degree has let the virus evolve and become more spread out. For instance, she gives the example, she who directs a hospital in Milano says, we had a plan for when the SARS contagion happened. When COVID arrived, that plan was completely disregarded or hardly even considered. So she also mentioned, in difference from the strike, or in similarity with the strike in England now of nurses who have gone out on a strike, England has a plan to how deal with situations such as the strike here. Maybe a strike is less, we cannot anticipate a strike as much as we can anticipate how the evolution of a virus moves, but still, we should be better prepared. And why is that not the case? Why do we need to start from scratch every time, as if we don't know enough?
That's a really good question, an important question, and it's a question that I was asking my scientific sources right at the beginning of my effort to write about this. I asked scientists that I knew from the CDC and other places, why were we so unprepared for something that was so predictable by science? Science knew that there was a pandemic that would come eventually. Science knew that it would probably be caused by a virus. Science knew that that virus would probably be an RNA virus because they mutate quickly, change quickly, and adapt quickly. Science knew that the RNA virus could very likely be either an influenza virus or a coronavirus because of past experiences with dangerous, high-evolving influenza viruses and coronaviruses. And science knew that it would come out of a wild animal, someplace where humans have contact with wild animals, such as a wet market in China. Science knew all that. Science was talking to public health planners about the need for preparedness, the need for readiness. There was some planning that was done because we had the scientific knowledge and because we had the past experience of SARS-1, among other things, past pandemics and pandemic threats such as SARS-1, which is a very dangerous virus, but it was stopped after only 8,000 cases. Science knew all this, public health knew all this. Why was scientific knowledge not put through the lens of public health preparation to create preparedness? And I think the answer is not that political leaders didn't hear these voices, but that preparation is expensive. Preparation is expensive, very expensive, costs tens of billions of dollars. And if you tell us a public leader, especially a selfish, ignorant public leader who happens to be president of the United States, that a pandemic is coming and he should spend tens of billions of dollars to prepare for it, and then he asks, will it happen between now and the next election? And you say, we don't know, we can't predict that. Then he will ignore that advice because tens of billions of dollars seems expensive, and because the political capital needed to be prepared seems expensive. And he doesn't realize that the pandemic may occur next year, and if it does, it'll cost tens of trillions of dollars, not tens of billions of dollars. So one scientific expert, a trusted source of mine, described all this, and he said it's a failure of imagination by political leaders to imagine that response could be 1,000 times more expensive than preparedness, and that the pandemic could occur next year before their next election, I think.
Yeah.
You want to translate that?
Sure. Yeah, it is. Mi scuso di nuovo. È una ottima domanda, Laura, una domanda che lui stesso ha posto ai suoi colleghi scienziati quando è scoppiato il Covid. Come mai siamo stati colti di sorpresa, come mai eravamo così impreparati, visto che la scienza, la comunità scientifica sapeva già, aveva tutte le informazioni riguardo alla possibilità di una pandemia causata da questo tipo di virus. E Kwame ha dato la lista di tutte quelle informazioni che qui io non ripeto, ma che la scienza, la comunità scientifica già sapeva e che poteva infatti prevedere, che aveva previsto che una pandemia di quel genere sarebbe scoppiata prima o poi. Quindi anche l'esperienza della SARS che ha dato altra informazione utile riguardo la diffusione del virus, è stata molto utile per prepararsi alla possibilità di un virus come quello che è scoppiato con il Covid. Perché la comunità scientifica, la conoscenza della scienza non è stata trasmessa, non è stata registrata dai politici, non perché i politici non avessero, come dire, nessuna conoscenza o non fossero interessati a questo, ma perché prepararsi a una pandemia di questo genere vuol dire spendere un sacco di soldi. milioni e milioni di soldi. La preparazione richiede molti fondi e se il leader politico principale è un presidente piuttosto ignorante, come lo era il presidente degli Stati Uniti al momento prima del scoppio della pandemia, il quale viene informato su questa possibilità dagli scienziati e poi chiede: ma qual è la possibilità che scoppi tra adesso e la prossima elezione? E gli scienziati dicono: ma non si sa con certezza, naturalmente. Allora il presidente in questione decide che non vale la spesa spendere tutti quei soldi per prepararsi alla pandemia. E alla fine è proprio, come dire, un fallimento dell'immaginazione politica, dice Quammen, perché non essendosi preparati e aver, come dire, investito tutti quei fondi per una adeguata preparazione, vuol dire che il costo sarà triplicato, quadruplicato, fate voi le proporzioni, e quindi è come dire, è una lezione in umiltà, in un certo senso.
Io, se posso, sempre riguardo la domanda di mia zia, la dico in italiano e poi la traduci te in inglese. Volevo chiedere se nel 2009 la World Health Organization, WHO in italiano, ha chiamato a lupo al lupo per via dell'influenza suina. E poi ci sono stati molti meno casi e molte meno morti di quello che ci si aspettava. Però si era intervenuti, tant'è vero che poi la WHO ha dovuto anche scrivere una lettera di scuse per quello che era successo, ha dovuto revisionare il caso e mi chiedevo se questo può aver avuto un'influenza sul modo in cui è stata gestita la pandemia nel 2020.
Briefly, 2009 SARS, danger of infection. There had been some preparation being made for containing the infection, and it ended up being not as deadly and as serious as it happened later in 2020 with COVID. So much so that a letter had to be written asking for, apologies for why it had not been as serious had it had been anticipated. The question from Cecilia is, could that past, not too far in the past experience have affected the way that we did not get prepared fully for COVID? I don't know.
Yes. Let me just clarify. SARS-1 was 2003. 2009 was influenza.
Yeah, so it might be my bad.
Okay.
Sorry.
Cecilia parlava della suina, dell'influenza suina, non della SARS-1.
My bad.
Okay, so 2009, yes, there was this so-called swine flu, influenza. And it seems to have begun in Mexico and gotten into the US and then spread to the world. And alarms went up because it looked like it was going to be a very serious influenza, a pandemic of influenza that was going to be a very virulent strain. And so alarms went up, as they always do with influenzas. Get prepared, get vaccinated. We're creating a new vaccine for this. This also happened in 1976. There was a swine flu scare. Right at the time that Seveso was experiencing its dioxin tragedy, there was an influenza in 1976. And in the United States, there was great reaction against that. We need a vaccine. We need to get everyone vaccinated against this swine flu of 1976. The president of the US, Gerald Ford, then went on television, got vaccinated on television to encourage people to get vaccinated. Then that turned out to be not a very dangerous transmissible strain. So the preparations were all virtually unnecessary. There was an overreaction. Some people got sick from the vaccine itself, which is always a danger. And President Ford lost the election. He lost the election because he had reacted too strongly to the threat of a pandemic. And then in 2009, that happened again. There was an influenza that looked like it was going to be very dangerous. It's hard to predict how dangerous an influenza will be. Influenzas are a very unpredictable group of viruses. So in 2009, again, there was strong reaction. The World Health Organization said, everybody get ready, this could be a bad pandemic. And then it turned out to be not very bad. That's always a danger with predicting viruses, particularly viruses such as influenzas and coronaviruses. It's hard to know in advance how serious it will be. But it's better to be prepared with tens of billions of dollars and people getting vaccinated than not to be prepared at all, except when you get prepared with tens of billions of dollars and you get a lot of people vaccinated and some people get sick from the vaccine, and then the pandemic is a fizzle. And I'm sure that contributed to lack of vigilance when this alarm rang. It's like the old story of the boy crying wolf in the forest when he's taking care of the sheep. And if he cries wolf twice when there is no wolf, then the third time when there's a wolf, people will ignore his cry. That's inherent to the problem of unpredictable viruses. And I don't know that we'll ever get away from it. The people of South Korea and the people of Hong Kong and the people of Singapore understand this because they have been through both real disease catastrophes, such as SARS-1, which was very bad in Singapore and bad in Hong Kong, and MERS in 2012, which was very bad in South Korea. Those people understand this, but other countries are fated always either to overreact or to underreact. And it's hard to get that balance right.
Yes.
But ultimately, it's less expensive to overreact than it is to underreact.
Elena, vedo che hai la mano, do la precedenza, non so, Beatrice, dimmi tu.
No, direi forse chiudiamo questa domanda con una breve traduzione da parte tua. Questa risposta in realtà.
Sì, va bene, e poi passiamo a Elena. Semplicemente David Quammen ha spiegato che effettivamente è così, che le previsioni della gravità di una pandemia dovuta a influenza o come la swine flu scare del 2009 è difficile da prevedere con esattezza. E nel 1976 c'era stato un allarme per la swine flu scare, per questo tipo di influenza dovuta trasmessa dai suini. Ci fu una grande reazione proprio quando lo stesso anno che Seveso è stato, come dire, colpito dall'incidente della diossina. Ci fu una grande reazione, fu creato un vaccino, il presidente degli Stati Uniti di quell'epoca, a quel momento era Gerald Ford, ha preso il vaccino davanti alla televisione e per convincere il pubblico in generale di fare lo stesso, però si dimostrò non molto grave e cosa ci fu? Ford, come conseguenza, molto probabilmente anche per questo, perse le elezioni e questa overreaction in un certo senso fu anche un po' come dire difficile perché alcuni che furono vaccinati poi anche morirono e questo non andò molto bene per la percezione che la reazione fosse forse un po' esagerata. Nel 2009 la stessa cosa, ci fu un allarme per questa influenza e ci fu una grande reazione. Anche qui non si dimostrò essere tanto seria come quanto si era previsto, però dice Kwame, è sempre meglio essere più preparati che non preparati affatto. E probabilmente questo fatto ha contribuito, come Cecilia ha fatto nella domanda, alla un po' tiepida reazione del 2020 quando si è presentato il Covid, nel senso che hanno voluto muoversi un po' più come dire, con esitazione, un po' come nella storia al lupo, del ragazzo che chiama al lupo, l'hai fatto già un paio di volte, si è dimostrato non così serio, la terza volta probabilmente ti prendono un po' meno seriamente. Comunque, detto questo, e considerato che è difficile fare la previsione di come sarà questa influenza, se veramente seria o no, vale comunque, è più importante cercare di essere preparati che meno preparati. Quindi lui ritorna su questo punto e lo dimostrano paesi come la Corea del Sud, Singapore e Hong Kong, che essendo stati colpiti da diverse forme di epidemia, sanno misurarsi verso queste possibilità di pandemia in maniera più concreta e empirica che non altri paesi.
Grazie Elvira. Elena, vuoi dire qualcosa? Vuoi intervenire?
Io volevo ringraziare il professore Komen per i suoi spunti e volevo salutarvi perché purtroppo mi devo scollegare e mi sono sentita estremamente onorata di essere qua presente e essere presente in questa conversazione.
Grazie a te per essere parte del nostro pubblico, sempre, e per avere Seveso nel cuore, vero? Grazie Elena, a presto.
Grazie.
Helena is thanking you for being present. She has very much appreciated the conversation and she is very honored to have been part of this conversation. So she has to leave, however, so she thanks you very much for that.
Prego.
Grazie.
Thank you for being with us.
C'è qualcun altro che vuole intervenire? Noi, non so, ditemi da Villa Do, ditemi se c'è ancora qualche domanda. Vedo una manina che è la mano di Laura, no? Laura devi...
No, meglio di no. Però è molto interessante, proseguiremo. Ringraziamo il professor Kwame, di cui seguiremo sempre con molta passione di lettura le sue pubblicazioni, d'accordo con Gabriele, non mi ricordo, Pagani, concordo pienamente con lui sul fatto che la modalità di narrare, come si muove la comunità scientifica, con quali relazioni, con quali intuizioni, con quali ipotesi, insomma il suo modo di narrare è veramente affascinante e secondo me anche esaustivo. Io che non provengo da studi scientifici, ho fatto tutt'altro, percorso classico, filosofia e poi mi sono laureata in economia, non mi ha mai appassionato la scienza. Quando ho incontrato i testi di Kwame ho cominciato a capire, la scienza mi ha cominciato ad appassionare. Ok, vorremmo avervi qui.
Un prossimo viaggio di Kwame in Italia sicuramente vorremmo una tappa sevesina.
E anche Gabriele Pagani, se viene a trovarci a Seveso, siamo vicini, ci farebbe molto piacere.
No, ma sarei venuto volentieri di persona, purtroppo avevo già organizzato un weekend in montagna. Infatti.
Si vede. Ma ti aspettiamo.
Volentieri.
Grazie.
So briefly to summarize what Laura just said, that we being the people from Villa d'O, Seveso, and others all here present, will continue to read with great passion the books that you write. Laura has emphasized, underscored what Gabriele Pagani has already said, that the modality, your way of narrating science is very, very convincing and fascinating and exhaustive. She, who comes out from an entirely different educational itinerary, classics, philosophy, and economics, was not ever very interested in the scientific way of thinking, but your books have opened that passion to her, and she hopes that you will be able finally one day to come over to Seveso and have in-person conversation, continue this conversation with all the people here, and the same for Gabriele Pagani. So thank you.
I hope so too. I hope so too. Prego and grazie mille. Thank you very much for your interest, for your tolerance of my ignorance of the Italian language, and for your hospitality. I'm very grateful, and I very much want to get to Seveso when I get back to Italy next time.
Thank you, Mr. Quammen. It was a real pleasure and an honor to have a conversation with you, and so thanks a lot for this possibility, this occasion. So see you in the past, in the future. Sorry, see you in the future.
In the past as well.
Sorry, see you in the future.
Grazie mille.
Sorry. Bye. Ciao,
Ciao,
ciao.
Gabriella.
Grazie.
Ciao, you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
David.
Thank
Ciao a
you.
tutti.
Grazie a tutti. Grazie.
Ciao, grazie.
A presto. Alla prossima.
Buon Natale, Evi. Ciao.
Ciao, ciao.